All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the Houston Zoo's Facebook Live. Thanks for joining us. Today we are here in our rhino barn, and we are here to talk a little bit about our rhinoceros Indy. So my name is Kendall. I'm one of the hoofstock keepers here. I'm part of the team that takes care of our rhinos every day. We've also got Memory, also a hoofstock keeper here. We're going to be talking a little bit about Indy, the rhino you see right now. We are currently inside the rhino barn, so we get a question a lot of times when Houston gets a little cold snap like we're in right now, asking what do we do with the animals when it gets cold? And the answer is that all of our animals have indoor areas they can go to where they can stay warm, they can have heaters, and our rhinos are no exceptions. Right now we're standing in a barn that's got 4 big heaters in it that make sure that it stays warm and toasty in here for our animals for overnight. That being said, rhinos actually are very big creatures. You can see him here right now. He weighs over 4,000 pounds. He's got a whole lot of muscle and a whole lot of fat on him, so he actually does not have to worry too much about the cold. Even when it is pretty cold out there for us as humans, we see him playing in a mud wallow, splashing through puddles, doesn't really seem to be bothered by the cold. So he is pretty hardy as a species goes. Right now he's getting some extra treats. He's getting alfalfa hay. Alfalfa is a very green, very leafy hay, so it's one of his favorite types of hay. He actually gets 3 different types of hay for food here. He gets Timothy hay, which is kind of the bulk of his diet. He also gets a coastal hay, and then alfalfa hay is what we are using right now. Whenever we do tours or special events or enrichment or training, we use alfalfa because he loves alfalfa. We say that it's like chocolate for rhinos. You can see his big, wide lips. Are you pulling the hay in? Rhinos don't actually have any front teeth. So even if he were to open his mouth real big, you wouldn't be able to see any teeth in there. You would just see a big old empty hole into nothing. So they just use those big lips to pull up grasses, and then they have big, wide molars in the back of their mouth where they can chew up all their food. And that is all that these guys eat in the wild. So when his head is down like it is right now, that's actually a very relaxed posture for a rhinoceros. That's the easiest place for his head to be because that big old head that you're looking at can weigh over 500 pounds by the time that rhino is fully growing. And Indy is very close to being full grown. So trying to pick that head very high up off the ground requires a lot of muscles. And so it's a lot easier for them to just kind of walk along with their head low to the ground, and they'll eat up all the grasses that they can find. These guys are mostly found in the wild in South Africa. Those big open grassland plains where they can just eat and eat and eat all day. These guys will go through about 50 pounds of hay a day, if not a little bit more. They are still growing boys. We have 2 rhinos here at the Houston Zoo. They're both still growing, so they're not exactly on a diet. We will give them a lot of food, and if they eat it all, we'll just give them a little bit more because it's hay. They're not going to gain a lot of weight just eating that. So we can feed them as much as they really want and as much as they eat. He's going to go around and he's going to try to munch up all the last little bits of that alfalfa. So if you guys can see the bumps on the back of his neck, that's actually where all those muscles are that I was talking about earlier, where in order to lift his head up, he's got to contract all of the muscles in his neck, and they connect to a really high point behind his ears. You guys see that big hump of muscle right behind his ears? Those are all the muscles required to lift that head up. All right, so Waylon has asked us what is his diet. So he gets a whole lot of hay, and it's really just hay. It's coastal hay, it's Timothy hay, and right now he's getting a little bit of alfalfa hay. We have offered him other things. We have offered him things like tree branches. We've offered him different kinds of hay, even some fruits, even some vegetables. We've tried carrots, we've tried sweet potato. He says no thank you to all of that. He just wants hay. It is his favorite snack. So Indy right now is 10 years old, currently weighs over 4,000 pounds, but he probably can continue to gain weight before he's really considered fully grown. In the wild, these guys will grow until they're about 15 or 16 years old, and they will weigh about 5,000 pounds by the time they're done fully growing. So he is the biggest rhino we have here by far. But even so, he has a little bit more growing to do. Rhinos are a really long-lived species. In the human care, when they don't have to worry about food or any kind of predators or anything like that, when they're in human care, they can live into their 40s. Late 30s is normal, but they can live into their 40s. And Indy, like I said, is only about 10 years old. So he's still young. He's still a grown boy. The zoo actually has 2 rhinos. So one of the things we get asked a lot is how can we tell them apart? Indy has a pretty distinctive facial marking that I'm going to point out right now. So above his right eye, he's got a little divot. We're not really sure where it came from. It doesn't seem to bother him. It's definitely not something that's painful to him, but it is something that he has that our other boy George does not have. So if you're at the Houston Zoo and you're walking around and you're looking at our rhinos and you're trying to figure out which one it is, you can look for that little dimple on his face and know that this is Indy that you're looking at. So another thing I can tell you guys are probably looking at his face right now. You can see he's got those big old horns on his head, and that is something that rhinos are definitely known for. Indy's got a really good horn going right now. You can see that it's really fuzzy at the base. You can see all those fibers. It's actually because that horn is made out of the same thing that our fingernails are made out of. It's made out of keratin, which is a really fibrous protein, basically, that they file on bars and on walls and on all kinds of things, rocks and trees and really anything that they can rub up against, they will file their horn on it. So you can see that parts of his horn are really, really smooth and parts of his horn look almost hairy. And that's because he's filing it down as it grows. A rhino's horn is going to grow throughout its whole life. They're born with just a little nub on the end of their nose, and it'll just start growing and it never stops. So the longest rhino horn on record was almost 6 feet long. But it's up to a rhino as an individual to decide how they want that horn to look. And Indy apparently likes his to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more filed. We'll see them spending a good amount of time rubbing that horn on stuff throughout the day. They especially like it when it's all muddy. So he's out there, I think a lot of us have gone to get a manicure. You know, you got to soak your fingers in the little bowl before they start doing the filing. Rhinos will often wait until their horn is wet. They'll either go into mud or when it's raining, and then once that horn is good and wet and softer, then that's when they'll start rubbing it up against stuff so that they can file it into the shape that they want. So every rhino's got a little bit of a unique horn shape going on. All right, we see Dominic has asked, how can we help protect their wild counterparts? That's a great question. One of the things you can do to help support rhinos in the wild is supporting the Houston Zoo. We support rhino conservationists in Africa that are helping protect not just the rhinos, but their habitat as well. And so whenever you're supporting the Houston Zoo, you are helping save rhinos in the wild. These guys are white rhino. The rhinos that we have here at the zoo, they are rhinos. They're one of 5 species of rhinos found throughout the world, 2 of which are found in Africa, and 3 are found in various parts of Asia. So the ones that we have, like I said, they're white rhinos. They are the largest of all species, and they're also one of the only social species of rhino out there. So these guys will live in groups. Indy is at an age where he would probably be solo at this point. Young males leave the herd that they're born in and join bachelor herds while they grow up, and then once they get to a point where they're a little bit too old for the bachelor herd, they'll live a solo life for a little bit until they end up being in charge of a group of females. So Indy's kind of at an in-between stage right now. He's too old to be in the bachelor herd, but maybe not quite old enough yet to be a dad, so he would be just soloing life out in the wild if at this age. So he still gets to see George, his brother, who's at the Houston Zoo. They both see each other every day, but they live together. They like to kind of have separate spaces, so we make sure that they each get their own space. Ooh, someone has asked, what training do they do? That's a really good question. We can do a pretty good variety of stuff with our rhinos. So one thing that they're trained to do that's pretty simple, that you've been seeing a little bit during this Facebook Live, is opening their mouth on cue. So that helps us get a look at their mouth, get a look at their lips, make sure that all of that is healthy and good. It's also very cute, so we like doing it. They are also trained to step up on a scale regularly. We can weigh these guys whenever we need to. We have a scale that's actually installed in the floor of this barn. So all they have to do is step up onto it and stop for a few seconds so we can get a weight on them. That's how we monitor their growth. We make sure that they're getting enough food, that they're growing at a rate that we're happy with, and then we can change their diet according to that. So it's a really good way to keep an eye on their health. These guys are also trained to back up on cue, which is nice if they're ever just pushing up against a door or doing something that we don't want them doing, we can ask them to take a couple steps back. They'll do that on cue. But one of the best things that I think we can do with them is that we can actually draw blood from them completely voluntarily. So we do not have to sedate or restrain our rhinos at all in order to get a little blood sample from them. And what that means is we can collect just a small amount of blood without stressing them out, without it being a big process, and then we can study that blood. That blood will let us know what their hormone levels are. We can tell what their mineral levels are. We can see what their red blood cell count and their white blood cell count is. If any of them are ever showing signs that maybe they're feeling a little under the weather, the first thing we can do is grab a blood sample and make sure that they don't have any kind of infection. So by doing that, they're able to participate in their own veterinary care, which is really great for us. And again, it's done in a way that we don't have to stress them out in any way, which is always our goal with training behaviors like that. We want to make sure these guys live as close to stress-free lives as we can possibly give them. Caleb asks, what's their backstory? So Indy was born at the White Oak Conservation Center in Florida, which is kind of like a zoo, but not quite. More of a conservation center. You can take tours and stuff, but it's not necessarily open to the public. But they have had a lot of success down at White Oak breeding lots of species that are very endangered, like rhinos. So Indy was born there about 10 years ago, almost 11, to his mom, and George, our other rhino that's outside in the yard right now, was also born there. So they were half brothers. They have the same dad but different moms, so they grew up together. And when they were about 3 years old, it was time for them to leave mom's and go on and join a bachelor herd somewhere. So we were able to bring 3 male rhinos here that were all about the same age. And they can live in a bachelor herd here at the Houston Zoo until they're old enough to go their separate ways and end up being breeding males somewhere with a herd of females. So Indy is, again, kind of in that teenager phase. He's too old to be with mom. He's not quite old enough to be with girls yet. So he is just living the bachelor life here in Houston. But those are the only 2 places he's ever lived. And he has grown a lot since he got here. So when he first got here, I'm sure you guys can see those vertical poles. He could fit his whole head and actually part of one shoulder through that, because that's how small and skinny he was. He was probably the smallest rhino we'd ever had here at the zoo before. And then now he's so big he can barely fit his head through there. So he has just grown and grown and grown. Indy was always the scrappiest of his brothers. He was the smallest, but he didn't like to back down whenever he had food or if he had something that the rhinos would try to take from him. If they were wrestling, if they were ever around, Indy would not give up. He would not back down. We called him Scrappy for a long time just because of how scrappy he was. He was also incredibly vocal. Adult rhinos don't make a whole lot of noise, so we think of them as a quiet animal, but when they're young, they actually are a bit more talkative, and Indy in particular was very talkative as a young guy. He would make, sounds like a noise that they would just over and over, a really high-pitched, squeaky noise, and he would do that to us if he wanted attention. He would do it to his brothers if he was irritated with something they were doing. People would be walking by going, "What's making that noise?" And we just point at Indy, and well, that's him. You wouldn't think that noise is coming out of that big of an animal, but it would. I don't know if you guys can tell, but he's got a little bit of a runny nose right now. That is actually perfectly normal and very good. So as you can see, he's got his face down in the dirt a lot. He's eaten food. He's always got kind of dirt and grass and seeds all around his mouth and nostril, but he doesn't have a way to pick his nose like we do. We as humans, we have a very way to clean stuff out of his nose. Indy does not have that advantage. So instead, rhinos have adapted to have kind of a perpetually runny nose so that it's always just a little bit of clear discharge coming out so that they don't ever have anything stuck up there. So if you're looking at a rhino, if they've got kind of a clear runny nose going, that means that they are perfectly healthy. He gets the little alfalfa fluff kind of stuck in it, and it turns green. All right, guys, well, that's about it for time. Thank you so much for tuning in to meet Indy and see our rhino barn. Just wanted to let everyone know that you guys can join us for Zoo Lights starting tomorrow. And tickets are going to be on sale online for that. So that'll start tomorrow and run for at least a couple of months. So hope to see everybody there.